Hello everyone, I'm back. I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist about to review a case of gruesome family murder and speculate about motive and mindset, personality, and pathology. Any opinions expressed are purely my own, and viewer discretion is advised. Now let's talk about Joel Guy Jr. It's late November 2016 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Lisa Guy, the mother of Joel Guy Jr. and wife of Joel Guy Sr., had planned to work for one final week, starting the Monday after Thanksgiving, before her retirement in December. However, when that Monday came, her boss became increasingly worried when she wasn't showing up to work, nor responding to multiple attempts to contact her. Lisa Guy had always been a conscientious worker in her role as an HR accounts payable administrator, so the idea that she would blow off her last week of work was highly uncharacteristic. And even more so was the notion that she wouldn't be calling in or even responding to text or calls. So law enforcement was called to do a welfare check at the Guy household in Knoxville. Knox County officers Stephen Ballard and Jeremy McCord arrived at the house on Golden View Lane. There was a for sale sign out front, but no real estate lock on the front door. And there were other strange things. Through the window on the front door, they could see bags of groceries that included perishable items like ice cream and meats. They went around the back of the house and saw that on the back door, the doorknob had actually been removed, leaving just a hole, and evidently that doorknob had been used to replace the doorknob on the front door. They heard a dog howling and barking from inside. There was also a strange degree of heat radiating through that opening on the back door where the doorknob should be, and a strange smell emanating from the house. Given these exigent circumstances, officers decided they needed to enter the scene. One officer used a garage door opener in one of the Guy's cars, which were present despite the apparently empty house, to open the garage. The officers could then access the house through the garage, and this is where their tour of the House of Horrors began in earnest. There was animal feces and urine stains on the carpets. Heaters were plugged in and operating at full blast at the same time as the thermostat had been cranked up to the max setting, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The pungent aromas were now overwhelming. There was also a large covered pot cooking on the stove. On the kitchen table were the Guy's wallets and a sledgehammer. The officers also saw long guns and ammunition strewn about. Up the stairs, the scene announced itself as clearly sinister. At one end of the hallway was a room with an overturned exercise machine, blood spattering the walls and soaking the carpet, and unmistakably a pair of severed hands, which would be determined to be Joel Guy Sr.'s. At that end of the hallway, there were also large vats containing something called sewer line cleaner number 2. On the other end of the hallway, where the master bedroom was, there was a huge pile of clothes, but other strange objects. Technician lights, a blender, black garbage bags, plastic sheeting, which was also covering the bed. A pile of Beanie Babies was on the carpet, and there were more bottles of corrosive chemicals: muriatic acid, hydrogen peroxide, lye, bleach, and drain cleaner. And then in the bathroom, they found what prosecutors would describe as a diabolical stew of human remains.
After the limbs of these people were removed, the killer placed them separately into two 45-gallon blue Sterlite containers. The killer put Lisa's body parts in one, and he put Joel Sr.'s in the other. And then he covered them with a corrosive substance and left them there to liquefy into some sort of diabolical stew of human remains.
Seems entirely too similar to an infamous scene in the show Breaking Bad. But this was real life. The officers also found several items at the scene that I would characterize as having significant evidentiary value. In an open suitcase, there was a note with the name and an address of a Louisiana Ace Hardware store, along with a notation about sewer line cleaner. There was a backpack belonging to the murdered couple's only son, Joel Guy Jr., and in it was a notebook with several handwritten pages that might be described as shopping lists and to-do lists, if the shopping and to-dos were all in the realm of murder and body disposal. The entirely too on-the-nose title that had been scrawled on the front of that notebook was Book of Premeditation. Let's come back to the notebook later, though, because there was one more piece of evidence that would have more immediate consequences for apprehending the suspect. In a Walmart shopping bag, the officers found a receipt for medical supplies that had been purchased just 2 days earlier in the afternoon, several hours after those groceries that had been left downstairs, so a picture was emerging. Lisa Guy had returned home from shopping that Saturday, and before she could even put the perishables away, something horrible had happened. Then a few hours later, someone goes out to get medical supplies from a Walmart, and there was evidence that these were then used in an upstairs bathroom. And so thanks to the cooperation from that nearby Walmart, officers were able to review the security film and find that it was in fact Joel Guy Jr. who had been at the Walmart that afternoon with a prominent bandage on one hand as he completed the self-checkout for several personal medical supplies and then left the store. Police then realized they needed to track down Joel Guy Jr. immediately. He had evidently returned to Baton Rouge, where he was vaguely still attending Louisiana State University as maybe a part-time student, but he had gone down there to seek medical attention at the student clinic. So it seems that whatever self-treatment he had done to clean the defensive wound on his hand with some disinfectant and dermaplast spray hadn't been satisfactory, and I guess he was worried about his hand. So the FBI, the Knox County, and the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's offices collaborated to place Joel Guy Jr. under surveillance and then apprehended him on November 29th as he was getting into his car outside of his apartment. A meat grinder was incidentally discovered in his trunk. So it seems that Joel Guy Jr., having left the crime scene at his parents' house in utter shambles to prioritize the treatment of his own injury, did intend to return at some point to continue carrying out his bizarrely macabre plan of body and evidence disposal, but he had not been counting on his parents having people in their lives who might be concerned with their disappearance. And that may be because accountability was not something Joel Guy Jr. was at all familiar with. You see, in terms of an immediate motive, there is a pretty clear-cut set of circumstances leading up to this crime. In that notebook, Joel Guy Jr.'s Book of Premeditation, in addition to the shopping and to-do lists, there is a page concerned with his parents' assets, right? So assets, her life insurance, $500,000, possibly more with double indemnity. So, double indemnity is a policy or part of insurance policies where if someone dies through some kind of accidental circumstances, including murder, sometimes you get double the payout in that case, or even triple in some cases. So he doesn't know about that part, but he knows about double indemnity. So possibly more, he says. But $500,000, with him missing dead, I get the whole thing. All her other assets are joint, go to him if missing, unknown if he is dead. His assets, so some properties there. And he notes that there may be homeowners insurance, but probably worthless after fire. So interesting things to be thinking about if you're just a loyal son. Interesting set of conditions he's considering when he's making notes about their assets, right? So why all of a sudden is he so concerned with their assets and where they go in the event of death or disappearance? Well, at 28 years old, Joel Jr. remained entirely dependent on his parents' finances. His food, his shelter, an apartment in Baton Rouge, and any discretionary spending was all entirely thanks to his parents. His parents, however, had long dreamt of retirement, and by the fall of 2016, Joel Sr. and Lisa had looked at their finances and decided it was time for Joel Jr. to start supporting himself. It would typically be once per year that Joel Jr. would visit his family, and he would alternate between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and in 2016, his plan had been to come for Christmas, and then for unclear reasons, he decided at the last minute to come for Thanksgiving instead. Joel Jr. was the only child that Joel Sr. and Lisa had together, but Joel Sr. had 3 daughters from a prior marriage, And Lisa had been a stepmother to those 3 girls from a young age, and they had always meshed well together. And that year, Thanksgiving was a special one because of this being the last one in their home on Golden View Lane before the parents retired and moved from Knoxville to Joel Sr.'s small hometown of Surgoinsville, Tennessee. And the youngest of Joel Jr.'s half-sisters, Michelle, came to the Thanksgiving celebration with her 2 young boys that year, and she gave an account of events that was notable for Joel Jr.'s uncharacteristic behavior. You see, she had assumed that Joel Jr. would be out of sight for much of the day, as had always been his norm, while the rest of them would hang out in different rooms, moving around the house and joking with each other and having a good time. That, quote, that Thanksgiving was completely different. The moment that I arrived, Joel Michael was talking to us. I'm not even sure Joel knew my kids' names, and so for him to talk to them was odd. So he was talking to my kids, and he was bringing them upstairs. Lisa had kept every single thing that this kid, Joel Jr., had, his entire everything, Beanie Babies that he collected, things you put on the shelf like science stuff, and she memorialized his entire life in boxes upstairs. They were bringing these boxes down, but it wasn't Lisa giving them the stuff away. Lisa didn't want to give it away. It was Joel Jr. giving it to my boys, which was very odd. And this is the first time he'd ever done anything like this. It may have been the first time he'd even interacted with these nephews of his, but now he's giving them his old toys. So when I hear someone is giving away possessions, my first thought would normally be, is this someone thinking of ending their lives, right? Giving away possessions is a warning sign for that, the sense that these things don't matter to me anymore. I want someone else to have them. But in this case, it's Joel Jr. giving away childhood possessions that his mother had kept. And so here I see it more as a sense in which he seems to feel he can sort of symbolically end his childhood, maybe. And maybe it's even a mild act against his mother's wishes. She didn't want to give these things away, apparently, but he decides he can dispose of his childhood identity that his mother was maybe holding on to, at least as memories. But for him, his mother's memories of him don't matter anymore. And really, I think the issue is there's this sense of glee in him doing it. In his head, he's decided he's going to carry out these murders, and he's excited about that decision. So he almost can't help being extroverted with his family and acting like the magnanimous uncle with his nephews. I think there's a real delight going on in his head that he knows he's going to do this thing and no one else knows it, but it means he can give things away and that he's just in a chipper mood, which is pretty frightening. At any rate, from there, his half-sister Michelle is on high alert during Thanksgiving after seeing this exchange between Joel Jr. and the kids. And just the fact that he's so talkative. Every time Michelle turns around, it's like he's right behind her. And he's talking, and he's spending all this time with her kids. And he seems to be monitoring her whenever she's upstairs using the restroom or anything. He always seems right behind her. And it's very off-putting. So she ends up actually going upstairs more because she says, I was pretending to do laundry and things like that, but really I was going to check on the boys because I didn't know what Joel Jr. was up to. She's clearly bewildered, can't figure out what's going on. She's basically just trying to make sure there's nothing untoward happening to her family while she is there. But they leave, her family leaves after Thanksgiving, and Joel Jr.'s plan is to stay through the weekend. So on Black Friday, he accompanies his father to go visit the new house that the parents are going to move into in Surgoinsville, and it appears to be an otherwise uneventful day. But then Saturday comes, and this is the day the murder plan is set into motion. While Joel Jr.'s mother is out buying those groceries around midday, which we know from the receipts and surveillance footage of her, it was her buying those. This is when Joel Jr. attacked his father. Joel Guy Jr. attacked and killed his father with a knife in the second floor exercise room of that house. The scene appeared to show a fight to the death, honestly. The blinds were torn, there was blood spatter all over the wall and corner, and the large Bowflex machine was overturned. The medical examiner will find that Joel Jr. stabbed his father at least 42 times. If anything, this is an underestimate given the state of the body by the time of the exam. But it also seemed in that assault with his father, Joel Jr. sustained several cuts to his hand, including a deep cut to his left thumb. Not long after, Lisa Guy arrived home, entered through the front door, and dropped the groceries on the floor of the foyer. Seemed to have then proceeded upstairs, but was attacked and killed with a knife. 9 of her ribs were severed, and the medical examiner found that she was stabbed at least 31 times. And so this is the part where listener discretion is really advised. So Joel Guy Jr. had decided that he needed to dismember his parents, right? So his father's hands were removed at the wrists, had been left on the exercise room floor. Lisa's head had been removed, carried downstairs, and placed in a pot on the stove and heated. At trial, the forensic examiner would testify that the head was not just severed, but actually broken off with force. Both victims had their arms and legs disarticulated, and their torsos were placed in a bin full of chemicals to dissolve. So in terms of his disposing of the evidence, we have these clearly described plans from his notebook, the Book of Premeditation. And it's evident that Joel Jr. had been planning this for at least weeks. It had been in the several weeks prior that he'd been procuring the murder supplies and disposal materials that had been listed on these shopping lists. He was caught on several cameras buying these supplies that he would later use to murder and try to dissolve his parents. He used cash at every transaction and self-checkout most of the time. He had bought supplies for the murder as early as November 7th. So the murders were carried out on November 26th. The first transaction we know of is November 7th, where he was purchasing several items at an Ace Hardware, including the muriatic acid and food-grade hydrogen peroxide. Then on November 18th at Home Depot, cameras recorded him buying the bleach sprayer, extension cords, and a timer. And at Academy Sports on November 19th, he was seen buying a knife. On November 21st, cameras captured him at a Knoxville Walmart buying large blue totes. So here we have one of the sort of shopping lists. Get knives, and then he wrote killing above that. He actually wrote get knives, and then specified for killing. Quiet multiple. Get carving knives to make small pieces. Get sledgehammer, crush bones. Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat. Get bleach, denature proteins. Get plastic bin for denaturation process. Does not matter where they're killed, just get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence of time of death, underlined. Not the mattress or couches. Get rid of bodies inside house. There and my DNA already there. Open up doggy door to provide entryway is crossed out. No, he needs to be blamed, not intruder. So this is one of the places where you can see that what Joel Guy Jr.'s plan was for his father to be blamed for his mother's murder. So he wanted to make it look like his father committed the murder against Lisa and then himself. I don't know if I want to read all this. Here's another place where you can see that. Cut off his arm and plant his flesh under her fingernails. Place her hand with his DNA so that his DNA is not washed away by shower. So place it in a way that it won't be washed off. Thinks he has this very elaborate, albeit disgusting plan. Destroy the soft tissue and soften bones. This is then a to-do list related to the disposal, but essentially what's pertinent is that he's describing, almost exactly what happened, except he was stopped in the middle of this. So he had done the things like been denaturing the tissues. He had turned the thermostat way up to melt fingerprints, he says. A lot of it was presumably to confuse the time of death as well. But again, he was stopped in the middle of it prior to, setting the place on fire, which had been his ultimate plan. So when you have these handwritten notes that are the murder plans outright, just the plans for murder, and they are corroborated with surveillance footage and crime scene evidence, and then you also have this assets page in the same notebook with all this other stuff, this page might as well have motive written at the top. He might as well have titled this motive. It's the kind of thing you can certainly imagine this guy doing, right? So in one sense, this is an open and shut case. And certainly that's how the trial went. In legal terms, I think there was no question about Joel Guy Jr. having committed a premeditated murder. And thankfully, he was quickly convicted and is serving multiple life sentences. But in another sense, there is something that remains unfathomable, which is a question that's not exactly why did he do it, but what kind of person could possibly do it? In other words, what's wrong with him, right? And we don't have that much to go on. I could find essentially nothing autobiographical about Joel Guy Jr., nothing that he's ever recorded or written about himself or his life. But one thing we do have is the testimony of his one and only friend, his lifelong best friend, and a recorded phone call between Joel Guy Jr. and this best friend. You know, if you want to understand someone, I do think a best friend is often the person accessing the sort of truest form of a person. You know, if anybody knows him, it might be this guy. So I'm saying maybe through Michael McCracken here, we can learn about Joel Guy Jr. So let's pull up that testimony and that jailhouse phone call between the two of them.
Got a couple of housekeeping matters to address. First, starting with our exhibits. General Sanchez, in the Academy packet, we had 2 discs, and I think they both...
I do like this, that I guess in Tennessee, the plural for disc is also disc. So it's a word like fish, like 1 fish, 2 fish, 1 disc, 2 disc, right?
Packet, we had 2 discs, and I think they both
we
had
had
the
2
same
discs
things on them. One of them...
All right, so here we're going to see Michael McCracken introduce his relationship with Joel Guy Jr.
Well, Michael Guy,
Yes.
how did you know him?
We went to high school together and college together, and we were roommates off and on through that time.
All right. When were you in high school together? What year?
2004 through 2006.
And after 2006, I take it you entered LSU, is that correct?
Yes.
And did Mr. Guy also enter LSU at that time?
No, he went to George Washington University for, I think, a semester.
Okay. And did he come back to Baton Rouge?
Yes.
When did he come back?
I think at the end of the first semester.
Would that be 2007?
Yeah.
So these guys had been friends in high school. Then when they go to college, Joel Guy Jr. initially starts at George Washington in D.C., but after only 1 semester decides to transfer back down towards Baton Rouge at LSU with his old high school friend here, and they end up rooming together.
Yes.
Now, I take it because you were roommates for some period of time, you knew him,
Mm-hmm.
and you know his voice,
Yes.
and you could recognize his voice on a telephone call. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a couple weeks after the murder, Michael McCracken gets a phone call from prison, and essentially they're now going to introduce that phone call, and I'll just skip ahead to where it actually starts in earnest.
Well, I've pretty much fucked everything up. I don't really have much of a chance of being happy anymore. But you do. You do. Eventually you're going to meet somebody, and you've claimed that I haven't been an albatross or anything before, but I certainly would be now. In freaking prison.
Okay. Joel Guy Jr. says, well, I've pretty much effed everything up, and I don't have a chance of being happy anymore, but you do. You're going to meet somebody, right? He says, you're going to meet somebody. So it sounds to me like part of their friendship was commiserating maybe about being lonely, needing to meet someone. I think that's the most likely thing, is that part of what they would talk about is, I don't have anyone. Now, I have seen people on Reddit or other forums maybe speculate that Joel Guy Jr. may have had a romantic interest in Michael McCracken, that he may have been actually seeing this in his mind as a significant sort of romantic relationship, and that maybe that colors the way he's framing this, like you're going to meet someone else, might be what he's saying in that case. to me, I think that that is possible. It's theoretically possible, but to me, if there were an actual kind of romance here, the verbiage would be quite a bit different overall. You know, to me, this sounds like two kind of young men that have been trying to navigate the social world together. And, you know, young men do this, believe it or not. They commiserate about their, you know, failures in dating or about wanting a romantic relationship. You know, they'll update each other on how scary it is to ask out that girl in math class, and they've been thinking about it all semester. You know, these are the kinds of things that maybe happen behind closed doors. You know, I don't know exactly, but you're going to meet someone tells me that the relationship was something where then they might be equating happiness with one day finally being in a relationship, right? Because that's the first thing Joel Guy Jr. says. You can still be happy. You're going to find someone. And then you have Joel Guy Jr. alluding to being an albatross around his friend Michael's neck. And so that sounds like, you know, you've told me before I'm not an albatross around your neck. So it sounds like for a while, Joel Guy might have been saying, I'm a loser weighing you down. I'm freaking everybody out with my bug eyes or whatever. And then Micah would have to say, no, you're not an albatross around my neck. And now Joel Guy is saying, okay, but yes, I definitely am now. You can't be having a friendship with me now. I'm a guy in prison charged with murder. That'll freak people out. You know, that's going to hold you down, right? That seems to be what he's saying. I mean, I'm in freaking prison.
On that basis, I think you should probably just sort of consider me dead and move on with your life. So I'm not going to try to initiate any more contact with you beyond sort of, you know, the practical concerns we discussed earlier. And I may do that with a lawyer.
So you should consider me dead, and I'm not going to initiate any conversations with you. Basically, let's stop talking other than maybe practical concerns. I'm not sure what he means by that.
With you beyond sort of, you know, the practical concerns we discussed earlier. And I may do that with a lawyer.
Assumably things related to either the case or payments on their house. Maybe those are the kinds of things I would think are practical concerns, maybe. But this sounds like this does kind of sound like he's trying to break up the friendship. This is a friendship breakup. I do wonder if there's an element of it's not in my interest. You know, my lawyers have advised me not to talk to you because I might say something, and so he's sort of framing it as it's not you, it's me. But the real reason might be a little more Machiavellian, that he doesn't want to talk to this guy anymore. I think that's possible.
Because I genuinely do want you to be happy.
Sure you do.
And that's pretty much the end of my outburst. So there you go. Okay.
And that's pretty much the end of my outburst. So there you go. So the fact that he calls it an outburst is surprising to me. It didn't sound like something I'd call an outburst, not emotionally, but it does make me think maybe there's more emotion, including some rage, which we would typically associate with outburst, in his sentiments there. I don't know. I don't know why he's calling it an outburst. Is he seeing this as actually kind of an angry friend breakup that he's doing because maybe he felt like his friend was actually pulling away from him? And so, you know, you do see this in kind of vulnerable narcissism, right? It's like if you have if someone who has some vulnerable narcissistic traits senses that their employer is about to end things, they will quit first. Or if their romantic partner is going to end things or seems to be pulling away, they'll just lash out and say, no, this is over. Because they're trying to protect against the ego wound that would be someone else abandoning them. You know, so this could be sort of narcissistic or borderline. It's all sort of the cluster B soup, I would say, is this impetus to end things yourself before someone else ends them. either to protect the ego or to protect the emotional state. Narcissism would be more the ego, borderline would be more protecting yourself against the wound, the abandonment wound. Okay, so now we have Michael McCracken's response. Okay, sorry, I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know that there is anything to say. I'm in here. I'm in a tell me I'm a fucking idiot. Tell me, why did I do this? Blah, blah, blah. How could you? I mean, to have a stream of consciousness about anything.
Okay, so Joel Jr. is now saying, go off on me, basically. Michael says, I don't know what to say, and Joel Jr. says, call me an idiot. Say, how could you do this? Have a stream of consciousness about anything and everything. So this is like, he wants Michael to, one, just say anything. Like, I just want you to talk, maybe as part of it, right? But two, he's asking specifically for Michael to express some anger, frustration, or outrage. And that part makes me wonder, does Joel Jr. kind of require an external processor of emotions? Does he require a container outside of himself because he can't handle them himself? And so he just stays flat, and to process them, he needs someone else to do that. And then he can identify with that person when they're experiencing emotions. He would then be more of an observer or indirect experiencer, right? So that's the idea of projective identification in psychoanalysis terms. He wants to project emotions into his partner and then have his partner experience them because he cannot experience them.
Everything related or not, anything I just said.
Let's talk about anything, for one.
I just did word vomit at you just now, so, I mean, word vomit at something real. It hurts my heart, all of it.
Michael McCracken, I think he could be really dismayed about the whole situation, not just about what Joel Jr. is saying right now, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been my best friend for my entire adult life. I don't know that would ever have changed regardless of what you did.
Right, so he's talking about the charges.
Assuming it wasn't news.
1 minute remaining.
Oh, shit. Oh, shit. Can you add more time? I mean, I'm not fully surprised. I don't know. I don't know what to say. All of that aside, I am angry and lost and confused.
Okay, so I am all of that inside. So Michael is now saying, those things you asked me to express, anger, confusion, I am that inside, but he's actually not able to express them either. So it's kind of like the two of them are speaking about emotions that in a way neither are fully experiencing. They're sort of talking about knowing how to feel. Like I'm all that inside. So I'm saying, hey, I'm containing the emotions you want me to contain, but I'm not any more capable of expressing them than you are. But again, it is hard to tell. Are they kind of talking about two things simultaneously right now? They're talking about Joel Jr.'s plan for them to stop talking. That's one thing. But of course, there's this greater context of, are they also sort of just talking about the crime that Joel Jr. committed? Joel Jr. does throw in, and I mean, it wasn't me. Yeah, I mean, you have several things kind of work on two levels. When Michael McCracken says, I'm not totally surprised, ostensibly, maybe he's talking about, I'm not surprised that you don't want to talk to me anymore. But could he also be picking this phrase that I'm not surprised about the charges against you? Again, in sort of psychoanalytic terms, sometimes there's this kind of double speak that I think it gets called like Freudian slips, which can be sort of overwrought in pop culture especially. But if you imagine all of the potential things we could say at a given moment are sort of competing for our conscious awareness. All of these possible phrases are competing to come into your consciousness and be the thing that you say. So sometimes the thing that wins out and becomes the thought you express is that it wins just because it's the perfect thing to say in one situation. But other times, if there's one thing you can say that would kind of mean two things at once, then that's more likely to win that little neuronal battle for the spotlight. At least this is the theory of kind of a Freudian slip, right? So in a conversation, you're picking the next thing to say, and you're picking the way to phrase it. And so if there's one thing that expresses more than one thought that you want to express at the same time, maybe you get like double points for that thought in the little pinball machine of your brain coming up with them.
I mean, I'm not fully surprised. I don't know. I don't.
And what would it mean if you weren't totally surprised that Joel Jr. was charged with these things? You know, maybe part of me was always afraid that you were capable of something unimaginable. I don't know. I don't know what to say.
I don't know what to say. All of that aside, I am angry and lost and confused and disappointed and upset and mourning you like your day, but I'm talking to you on the phone and I don't. It's taking everything I have to process and maintain my sanity. I mean, that is the biggest thing here is that I think of you all the time. You were the only good thing in my life. All the crap in the apartment. You're the only thing I'll miss.
So, you know, you can see why some people might speculate about a romantic aspect to this. I don't think we have enough to go on there. Joel Jr. saying, I prepaid rent through August, so it's not like my stuff's going to get thrown out.
Manager's going to be throwing my shit on the street in Pensa. Man, how did you manage that? That's a lot of money. Yeah. One of the last things my mother did was pay that. So.
And then Michael McCracken said, oh, how'd you manage that? Where'd you get that money, right? How'd you manage to pay a lump sum for rent? And Joel Jr. says, yeah, one of the last things my mother did was pay that. So.
Okay.
And we just get, okay, in response. There is some definite doubt and concern about Joel Jr.'s innocence that we're getting from Michael McCracken. Even on that call, like, okay. So then we have the defense attorney kind of gleaning some more information about Michael McCracken and his relationship with Joel Jr.
His parents lived in Luling, is that right? Luling, Louisiana?
Yes.
How far is Luling from Baton Rouge?
About an hour, maybe.
And during that 10-year period of time, did you ever meet his father?
No.
And during that same 10-year period of time, did you meet his mother?
Once.
And did you have any interactions with her for that 10 years other than that one time?
No.
And you had no interactions with his father?
Correct.
And am I correct? You didn't even know he had sisters?
Correct.
And then we'll kind of hear about Joel Jr.'s social awkwardness as described by his friend here.
Described Joel as being socially awkward. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And as I think you've described him as he got older after high school, he became more and more isolated and withdrawn.
Yes.
And he would go into his room at time for days. Is that right?
Yes.
And he would kind of escape on his computer. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think you said that he spent an awful lot of time on the internet and YouTube and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
And you said, I believe you've stated that there were weeks where you would just barely see him at all.
Right.
So that's significant, right? That they live together, and this is ostensibly his best friend that he's very emotional about, but there would also be weeks where despite living together in the same place, he doesn't see him at all because Joel is just in his room.
And did you know him to have any friends?
When we were in high school and early college,
And did you see in the later years, at least the last 3 or 4 years that you were together in Baton Rouge, did you see that tail off?
yes,
By the time you left Baton Rouge, would you say that he had any friends at all?
no,
So was he socially interacting with anyone but you?
no,
And your interactions with him were becoming less and less. Is that accurate?
correct.
So withdrawing from everyone, only having even had one friend, this roommate who eventually moved from Baton Rouge, and then at that point wasn't talking to the friend much at all, even.
I want to ask you a little bit, during the period of time that you knew him, did you know that he regularly, did you know him to regularly go home for Thanksgiving?
Yes,
The defense attorney had asked all these questions, and then we'll see the prosecutor will come on and kind of try to clarify or express this concern that it sounds like the defense is making it out like his family was sort of emotionally isolating from him. And the prosecutor's point is, whose decision was it to stop talking to his family?
He was isolated and nobody sent him packages or sent him letters. When the state has multiple witnesses who could testify that it was Mr. Guy's choice to isolate himself from his family, that in fact we have received information from Lisa Guy's brother that the defendant's relatives in Louisiana were not even permitted to know where he lived. He didn't want any interaction with his family. His sisters did not choose to not have a relationship with him. He didn't want a relationship with them.
You can see Joel Guy Jr. making this kind of eye roll smirk.
Were not even permitted to know where he lived. He didn't want any interaction with his family. His sisters did not choose to not have a
So the state was basically making a case that they want to do a redirect to Michael McCracken and ask him about Joel's relationship with his parents.
Do you know whether or not he was ashamed of his mother?
No,
Okay. Did you have a conversation with him about what you thought his mother did for a living?
yes.
And what was that conversation?
He said that she was an optometrist.
Okay. And did you ask him about that during this phone call that you had with him in December of 2016?
I think so.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't remember
And,
100%.
Did you learn that from your review of news reports that she was not, in fact, an optometrist?
Yes,
And you discussed that with him on this phone call, didn't you?
probably yes.
Okay. And you didn't ask him why he told you that when that wasn't really what she did for a living?
I honestly don't remember,
Okay.
but I would not be surprised if I asked that.
Okay. And you don't remember his response?
No.
Okay. Now,
So we don't get an answer to why Joel Jr. lied about his mom being an optometrist when she actually works in HR for a engineering firm. We just know that he lied about that for some reason. I can't say that I know why he would lie about that. The kinds of things I think about are maybe he feels it adds some social status if his mother is an optometrist. The other possibility is maybe he felt some need to explain how he was getting so much money sent from his mom, and in his mind, an optometrist would have more money to kind of throw around and support him than someone in HR. I don't know. In some cases, sometimes people just lie.
do you know whether or not she provided him support?
Yes.
And did she provide him with support?
Yes.
Did you ever know Mr. Guy to have a job during the time that you knew him?
Not a paid one.
Okay. Is there?
Yep.
And she was paying his utilities
Yes.
and all of his bills.
Yes.
Okay. And this notion that he was isolated and withdrawn, is it your understanding that that was something that he didn't want, or was that of his choosing?
I would say the latter.
That it was his choosing?
Yes.
He liked to spend time by himself.
Yes.
And a lot of people are like that. Would you not agree?
Yes.
There's some people who like just to be on their own. Okay. I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I don't know that the additional sort of social background information on Joel Guy is all that surprising. I think you can kind of look at him and say, this is probably someone that spends weeks by himself in his room, you know, but we can confirm he maintained only one adult friendship, and even in that one, he would stay in his own room for weeks at a time without talking. So do we have any videos of Joel Guy Jr. actually speaking at all? I could only find one, which is part of a hearing confirmation kind of thing. And he says no more than two things, but we can watch that.
Now 30, was arrested in Baton Rouge and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He has since been held in...
So also, incidentally, in one of his mug shots, you see this swelling that we're seeing here. I've never seen that officially reported on as to why he has that. But I think the theory that's out there is the one I would agree with, which is this looks like a dental abscess. So if you get a really bad tooth infection that turns into an abscess, that ends up pushing all of the tissue out on one side. So this looks very much like, you know, I've seen this kind of thing when I was on an internal medicine rotation, right? That definitely looks like a dental abscess. It seems to have come on and come off without anyone really talking about it. Presumably he got treated for it. It may have started because of poor dental hygiene in prison, but it does just sort of add to his bizarreness in some ways, right?
He has since been held in the Knox County Detention Facility.
New at 4, WATE 6 on your side reporter Bridget to dissolve their bodies in acid. But today, he made his first appearance in court. The man at the center of the brutal double murder of his own parents appearing in court for the very first time.
Who else was staying at the house on Wednesday?
Just not
On Thursday, Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Joel Guy is accused of wrath, like the injuries to his hands.
I had some rather severe cuts on my hands. I had a cut on my right palm right here where there's a scar, and I also had a very severe cut on my left thumb where there's a scar. I was worried about losing my left thumb, and so I needed medical treatment.
A possible motive, detectives say they believe Guy's parents were planning to cut him off financially.
So that's all we have of him talking. He has a kind of strange expressiveness, what I would say is like an unconscious appearing expressiveness. His expressions are not mirroring what he's saying. They're a bit surprised.
Very severe cut on my left thumb where there's a scar. I was worried about losing my left thumb, and so I needed medical treatment.
A possible...
It seems a bit uncoordinated, his emotional affect. It seems to not be really regulated by anything. I don't know how to describe his eyes other than kind of reptilian.
Just not
on Thursday, Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Joel Guy...
But we'll get into maybe what's going on behind those eyes. So this is not a technical term, but there's something a bit inhuman about the way he scans the room.
To cut him off financially, a discussion they were
It's rather uncanny. There's something about him that I think would be unsettling even if you didn't know what he had done, right? So if I were going to make a formulation that was kind of based on the biological, the psychological, and the social, why don't I start with external behaviors, and then I'll go to the psyche. So in other words, what's going on with him externally, and then what's going on with him, what might be going on with him internally. So externally, judging from the behaviors of his crimes, you can't get much more antisocial. So if you recall, antisocial personality disorder is the current DSM terminology for what's colloquially called psychopathy. An utter lack of remorse and or lack of empathy are the most pathognomonic, I would say. And those are typically going to account for then meeting other criteria like a pattern of deceitfulness and using others for one's own gain. But then there are other features that can vary a lot more. So, with him, we certainly see the lack of remorse and lack of empathy and disregard for others' rights. But so superficial charm, which is kind of a famous one, for a lot of people with antisocial personality disorder, if they are able to maintain some sort of position as a free person in society for any length of time, they must have some amount of charm to be able to subsist, right? Which charm, when combined with a lack of empathy, is of course very dangerous. However, in Joel Guy Jr.'s case, I'm not seeing charm, superficial or otherwise. So he would not get that box checked by me. I think in his case, it might be that because he's not able to rely on charm to get by in the world as a psychopath, his strategy for subsistence was to really lean into a different feature of ASPD, which is the parasitic lifestyle. As far as we know, he was able to live for 28 years without any outright criminality because of a parasitic type of relationship with his parents, where they gave him unwavering financial support despite getting nothing in return for it, except, I guess, occasional mutterings that he wanted to be a plastic surgeon one day. However, nothing in his school records indicate that he was on track to go to medical school after college graduation, which would have been the necessary thing to focus on. Or really, the first thing to focus on would have been graduating college at all. But to me, it seemed he sort of would throw out this, I'm going to be a plastic surgeon. And maybe he would say that because he thought it sounded impressive, maybe combined with some sort of superficial, albeit morbid interest in anatomy, maybe. I mean, I can imagine him thinking he's doing really serious research in his notebook when he writes out what the percent composition of human tissues are, despite the fact that that may have just been something he saw on Dexter. But that's besides the point. The point is that the most psychopathic features of this person only became evident, the criminality only became evident once there was the threat of having his parasitism cut off. His family, which was his host, planned to cut him off. Even the language here is reminiscent of a literal parasite, right? They cut him off. And so what he decides he has to do is kill his host so that he can continue feeding on their resources. So what might be going on biologically? Well, the thing about antisocial PD is we know that there are genetic factors involved broadly. There is some heritability to personality disorders. And so with ASPD, this essentially means there is such a thing as bad seeds out there. Some people are just bad seeds. And in a way, there's some comfort in that because it's like, well, at least there's nothing we could have done. Like our culture may be a sewer, but in some cases, it's not actually the environment. It's just the person. But the problem is we don't know which people are just the bad seeds and which are products of some environmental force or forces. We just know that both of these things, nature and nurture, are at play. Now, I do think in Joel Jr.'s case, because of the extreme nature of his actions, it's hard to imagine that there wasn't just something amiss from the get-go. But I think it's also worth exploring what could have been the psychosocial factors at play here. So socially and psychologically, this is a guy who's been living in a hole. And look, disclaimer, the whole discussion here, this is not intended to be dumping on quote unquote basement dwellers, okay? Or saying video games are ruining the youths. Living in a basement, if that's where you have to live, does not mean you're living in a hole. The issue is the mindset. So the mind is what actually makes your living situation a hole or not. And the question is, do you have a mission in life such that your dwelling is a home base or a springboard for that mission? Or is it a womb into which you have withdrawn to hide out from the world and indulge in only your own bodily demands? And similarly with video games, you can game and you can be actively engaged while you're doing it. You can be appreciating the aesthetics as an art form. You can be crafting a sense of personal motivation or of camaraderie. There's all sorts of ways to actively engage. But there is also the potential mindset of passive retreat. Retreat into a surrogate life with surrogate missions while you're in your hole, and you might as well be in one of those pods in the Matrix. And that's what I believe is going on with Joel Guy Jr. Remember, he's parasitic, right? So he's receiving his sustenance through a grotesque form of adult umbilical cord that's feeding into his pod. And he's filling his brain with passive entertainment such that his frontal cortex eventually shuts off completely. It atrophies from lack of use, perhaps. And the horrifying thing about this is that when he, quote, wakes up from the pod due to some disturbance in the real world, he thinks he's still in the Matrix. Meaning, he does not really register that there are consequences to his actions. He does not really register that these are his parents, or even that they are people. This goes to a sense of depersonalization and derealization that I would propose were also going on in the mind of Joel Guy Jr. So depersonalization / derealization, essentially these are two phenomena that often happen concurrently. Derealization being the sense that the world is not entirely real. It feels distant, as if you're watching it on a screen or in a dream. And depersonalization is the sense that you yourself are not living your own life, but are more of a passive observer, as if watching yourself in a movie. Now, in his case, I'm thinking about a degree of depersonalization where he is not even conscious of it happening. You know, there are people, probably most people with the syndrome of DPDR, who feel depersonalized and are distressed by this and want to not feel that way. And then maybe there's a handful of people that kind of accept it or even make having the syndrome kind of part of their identity. But here's the thing. If you're fully depersonalized, you're not even thinking about identity or who you are anymore. That ability to self-reflect is itself the thing that's impaired. Well, that's what I would call end-stage depersonalization, derealization, is that at a certain point, you're interacting like a zombie with a world you do not feel is real. And I think that's what we see with Joel Guy Jr. Why do I think this? What's the evidence of this? Well, interpersonally, remember that it's like he's actually incapable of holding any emotions internally, so he needs them to happen externally, which I think you could say is part of being antisocial on the one hand. But again, I think the corresponding internal sensation in his case would be complete depersonalization. The other thing is that he doesn't just lack the ability to hold emotions internally. It actually seems like he isn't having any kind of internal monologue at a certain point. Like he isn't even capable of maintaining thoughts in his head. Why else would he have written the kind of bizarre level of detail in those notes, I wonder, if not for the fact that he wasn't able to just think thoughts in his head? Like the idea that above knives, he would have to write killing. What, to remind himself that those were killing knives? Now, you could say, well, this is all part of an antisocial thrill. He's actually getting some delight from putting killing on there. He's exciting himself. But it's not just that. I think there are multiple aspects of these notes where it's just as if he couldn't think internally. For example, set her phone to send me a text message late Sunday to prove that I was in BR and she was alive. The fact that he had to explain to himself that is why he would be setting his mom's phone to text him. Most of us, well, obviously most of us would never do this, but it's the type of thing where if it were a reminder, it would just be set her phone to send me a text late Sunday. Set her phone to text me late Sunday. And the rest would just happen mentally, right? That, you know, to prove that I was in Baton Rouge, that should have been obvious to him, right? We don't have to write every explanation for every action we plan to do, especially in cases where it would be such a salient event, you would think. You know, if you found out your high school buddy's mom died, if you found this out and you realized you needed to call him, you would just write a reminder that said, call Steve. You wouldn't have to write, call Steve because his mom died. there's the part that just supposed to happen in your head. And that's the sense I get throughout this stuff, that there may be a perverse excitement going on, but more so that there's a kind of banal level of detail that's what sounds like should be an internal monologue is instead written on all these pieces of paper. I think that there is a loss of self-awareness or self-reflection, that the entirely passive parasitic lifestyle, which shows some level of antisocial personality, was already there perhaps, but that whole mode of being, of never being in kind of active mode, eventually atrophied away his ability to have any self-awareness or self-reflection at all. And that includes the ability to see one's own thoughts in one's head or to feel one's own emotions. That's, I think, the type of deficit we're dealing with, if I had to guess. Now, if you know my channel, you might know one thing I also like is improvising about weird biology or theoretical neuroscience kind of stuff. So I am going to propose what I think could be a biological correlate of this kind of severe depersonalization that I'm calling it in this case. And so it has to do with von Economo neurons, aka spindle neurons. So von Economo neurons are, in relative terms, a recent evolutionary adaptation found only in a few brain regions, only in primates, elephants, and large marine mammals, all of which are considered highly intelligent and social animals and are the only mammals that reliably pass the mirror mark test, meaning they seem to be able to recognize that a mirror is showing their own reflection. They can recognize themselves in mirrors. Only the mammals that have these von Economo neurons can do that. And they are these particularly large neurons shown here. These particularly large neurons that are almost symmetric, where the dendrite, where the signal goes, looks almost as much like an axon as it does like the typical dendritic tree, the branchy tree shape. And they seem to have evolved to rapidly connect distant brain regions in large-brained mammals, and to connect specific brain regions at that. They're not everywhere. They're primarily in the anterior cingulate cortex and the frontoinsular cortex. So first, where do you find them? So anterior cingulate cortex, and you can see here compared to orangutans have 0.6% of this brain region being von Economo, 2.3 in gorillas, 3.8 in chimpanzees, 4.8 in bonobos, and 5.6% in humans. They're most abundant in humans. Go humans, right? And then frontoinsular cortex, we've also got adult humans having like 80,000, which is 4 times more than the next closest and way more than bonobos and chimpanzees. What do? So an anterior cingulate cortex. So in 1999, an American neuroscientist, John Allman, and colleagues at Caltech first published a report on von Economo neurons in the ACC. And what they wrote was that their role was as air traffic controllers for emotions at the heart of the human social emotion circuitry, including a moral sense. And then in humans, intense emotion activates the ACC as it relays signals from the amygdala to the frontal cortex. And the ACC is active during demanding tasks requiring judgment and discrimination. During difficult tasks or when experiencing intense love, anger, or lust, activation increases. So think about, when is the ACC getting activated? Either difficult tasks or intense emotions, and particularly love. When mothers hear infants cry, it specifically activates, underscoring this social sensitivity. Same guy, Allman, who's the von Economo neuron expert, found that in the frontoinsular cortex, these neurons are implicated in self-awareness, right? Self-awareness and the complexities of emotion are thought to be generated and experienced. So, I hope you're bearing with me here. Are there any diseases that specifically target these von Economo neurons? And what would that look like? Well, in fact, there's frontotemporal dementia, historically called Pick's disease. So Pick's disease, specifically the destruction of von Economo neurons, shows what? Common signs and symptoms include significant changes in social and personal behavior, apathy, blunting of emotions, and deficits in expressive and receptive language. Then we get a little bit more if we go down to the signs and symptoms here. The ICD recognizes the disease as causative to a disorder affecting mental and behavioral aspects of the human organism. And then the list starts with dissociation from family. So dissociation from family, compulsive buying disorder, vulgar speech characteristics, screaming, inability to control emotions, behavior, personality, and temperament are characteristic display patterns. So in terms of these, there's apathy, but there's also this kind of screaming inability to control. In fact, there's two variants in terms of the emotionality. One is the more apathy with blunted emotions, and the other is a kind of out of control, very expressive emotionality. But in either case, there's definite social impairment and impulsivity. And remember all the things we said these neurons are involved with, moral judgment, emotional judgment, and again, that you see dissociation from family. Interesting to me. But what am I saying? Am I saying that Joel Guy Jr. actually has frontotemporal dementia? No, not saying that. For one, it would be extremely unusual for it to have that early of an onset in his 20s. But for another, I don't think clinically he looks like he has dementia. But I do think that frontotemporal dementia is an illustration of the function of von Economo neurons, because that's a disease that essentially wipes them out. So you can see what a complete loss of function of those neurons looks like. In Joel Guy Jr.'s case, I'm suggesting that if we apply one of the more humdrum principles of neuroplasticity, which is use it or lose it, and consider that he wasn't using those von Economo neurons, maybe he was starting to lose their functioning a bit, merely as a result of social disengagement and living a passive life where he was not engaging that anterior cingulate cortex in either any challenging, demanding, or social tasks that would normally cause that cluster of neurons to fire. And again, what might be expected from the selective atrophy of those von Economo neurons, the ones that in some ways make us intelligent animals and even within primates distinguish us as humans? Well, maybe some sorts of dissociation from family, apathy, impulsivity, poor judgment. Essentially a biological risk for exactly the sorts of things we saw going on in Joel Guy Jr., though without the full spectrum of dementia. Now, all of this may prove to be merely grasping at straws to try to make sense out of the nonsensical. What I will explicitly say is that I'm not arguing for any kind of insanity defense or any disease process that would excuse the crimes. There's a difference between the legal definition of insanity and the psychiatric concept of mental illness. Legally, insanity means the person was impaired to the point of being unable to recognize what they were doing or to make any sort of moral judgment about what they were doing at the time of the crime. I think it's abundantly clear that Joel Guy Jr. knew exactly what he was doing and why. But if the decisions that he made in his life did in fact lead to the sort of process of selective neuronal atrophy that I'm proposing here, with then a supervening psychological state of increasing depersonalization, which then enabled his increasingly antisocial behaviors, maybe that will at least be instructive for something. Thank you for watching.
This is not a lifetime.